The Appendices, which are most instructive.
Greater poop. Is Eris true? Malaclips the Younger. Everything is true. GP. Even false things? Mal 2. Even false things are true. GP. How can that be? Mal 2. I don't know, man. I didn't do it. Interview with Malaclips the Younger, KSC, Greater Metropolitan Yorba Linda, Herald News, Sun, Tribune, Journal, Dispatch, Post, and San Francisco Discordian Society Cabal Bulletin, and Intergalactic Report and Poop. Note: there were originally 22 appendices explaining all the secrets of the Illuminati. 8 of the appendices were removed due to the paper shortage. They will be printed in heaven. Appendix Aleph. George Washington's hemp crop. Many readers will assume that this book consists of nothing but fiction and fantasy. Actually, like most historical tomes, it includes those elements, as do the works of Gibbon, Toynbee, Wells, Beard, Spengler, Marx, Yerby, Kathleen Windsor, Arthur Schlesinger Jr., Moses, et al., but it also contains as many documented facts as do not seriously conflict with the author's prejudices. Washington's hemp crop, for instance, is mentioned repeatedly in Writings of Washington, US Government Printing Office, 1931. Here are some of the citations. Volume 31, page 389. October 1791, letter from Mount Vernon to Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of Treasury. How far would there be propriety, do you conceive, in suggesting the policy of encouraging the growth of cotton and hemp in such parts of the United States as are adapted to the culture of these articles? In the next 3 years, Washington evidently settled the matter in his own mind, whatever Hamilton thought of the proprieties. Volume 33, page 279, finds him writing from Philadelphia to his gardener at Mount Vernon to make the most you can of the India hemp seed and plant it everywhere. Waxing more enthusiastic, on page 384, he writes to an unidentified "my dear doctor," telling him, "I thank you as well for the seeds as for the pamphlets which you had the goodness to send me. The artificial preparation of the hemp from Silesia is really a curiosity." And on page 469, he again reminds the gardener about the seed of the India hemp. "I desire that the seed may be saved in due season and with as little loss as possible." The next year, he was even more preoccupied that the seeds be saved and the crop replenished. Volume 34, page 146, finds him writing, March the 15th, 1795, to the gardener again. "Presuming you saved all the seed you could from the India hemp, let it be carefully sown again, for the purpose of getting into a full stock of seed." Volume 34, page 72, undated letter of spring 1796, shows that the years did not decrease this passion. He again writes to the gardener, "What was done with the seed saved from the India hemp last summer? It ought, all of it, to have been sown, sewn, sick, again, that not only a stock of seed sufficient for my own purposes might have been raised, but to have disseminated the seed to others, as it is more valuable than the common hemp," italics added. Volume 35, page 265, shows him still nagging the gardener. Page 323 contains the letter to Sir John Sinclair mentioned in the first trip. The Weishaupt impersonation theory, congenial as it may be to certain admirers of the general, cannot account for all of this. A diary entry of August the 7th, 1765, The Diaries of George Washington, Houghton Mifflin, 1925, reads, "Began to separate the male from the female hemp at dew, rather too late. This is the passage quoted by Congressman Koch and remembered by Saul Goodman in the novel. The separation of male from female hemp plants is not required for the production of hemp rope, but is absolutely necessary if one wants to use the flowering tips of the female for marijuana. And at that time, Adam Weishaupt was very definitely still in Bavaria, teaching canon law at the University of Ingolstadt. All of this data about General Washington's hobby, originally researched by Michael Aldrich, PhD, of Mill Valley, California, was rediscovered by Saul Goodman while he and Barney Muldoon were employed as investigators by the American Civil Liberties Union on test cases seeking to have all remaining anti-marijuana laws repealed as unconstitutional. The Goodman-Muldoon Private Investigations Agency, which had been formed right after those two worthy gentlemen had resigned from the New York Police Department amid the international acclaim connected with their solving the Carmel disappearance, was offered a lion's share of the best-paying business accounts possible. Saul and Barney chose, however, to take only the cases that really interested them. Their most notable work was performed as investigators for lawyers defending unpopular political figures. Goodman and Muldoon, it was agreed everywhere, had an uncanny knack for finding the elusive evidence that would demonstrate a frame-up to even the most hostile and sceptical jury. Many political historians say that it was in large part their work which kept the most eccentric and colourful figures of the extreme right and extreme left out of the prison hospitals during the great mental health social psychiatry craze of the late 1970s and early 1980s. In fact, Rebecca Goodman's memoir of her husband, He Opened the Cages, written during her grief after his heart attack in 1983, is almost as popular in political science classes as is her study of comparative mythology, the golden apples of the sun, the silver apples of the moon, in anthropology classes. Appendix Beth. The Illuminati ciphers, codes and calendars. These following ciphers were found in the home of the lawyer Hans Zwack during a raid by the Bavarian government in 1785. Letters from Weishaupt, signed Spartacus, written in the code and outlining most of the plans of the Illuminati, were also found and led to the suppression of the order, after which it went underground and regrouped. These ciphers are given, curiously without their code names, in Durrell's History of Secret Societies, page 227. The purpose of the code names was to make breaking the cipher more difficult. All messages begin in the Zwack cipher, but the fifth word is always Weishaupt or Demole, and the message then switches to whichever of these ciphers is thus indicated. Whenever either of these words, or Zwack, appears again, the system again switches. Breaking the cipher by the usual statistical methods is, therefore, virtually impossible, at least before the invention of the computer. For the uninitiated cipher breaker is confronted with not 26, but 3 times 26, or 78, separate symbols, whose regularity has little to do with the celebrated formula EATOINSHRDLU, etc., for the regularity of the 26 letters. The reader should be reminded that a true code can never be broken, although all ciphers always can be, given enough time and manpower. A cipher has a serial one-to-one correspondence with the alphabet letters of the message being transmitted. A code proper has no such correspondence. Thus, any computer can break the cipher, but only the illuminated can read the code behind the cipher and know what or who the rising Hodge is. In addition, any of the 78 symbols can be replaced by the abbreviation for the corresponding tarot card, thus further befuddling the uninitiated. The tarots are arranged in the sequence wands, cups, swords, pentacles, trumps. Thus the first symbol can be replaced by ACW, Ace of Wands, the second by 2W, Two of Wands, and so on, through cups, swords, and pentacles. The last 22 symbols are represented by the 22 trumps. TF, the Fool, TM, the Magus, THP, the High Priestess, and so forth. Since there are 5 groups in the tarot, the 4 suits and the trumps, and the alphabet is repeated only 3 times, this leaves 2 null sets for transmission of Zen telegrams. Once you've seen the great vision, Hagbard once said, you look at everything else in life twice. The Illuminati calendars, finally, are all based on 5 seasons due to the law of 5s. The names of the seasons, their meanings, and the Christian equivalents are as follows. Verwirrung, season of chaos, January the 1st to March the 14th. Zweitracht, season of discord, March the 15th to May the 26th. Unordnung, season of confusion, May the 27th to August the 7th. Beamtenherrschaft, season of bureaucracy, August the 8th to October the 19th. Grummit, season of aftermath, October the 20th to December the 31st. Everything is dated from year 1 AM, Anno Mung, which is 4000 BC in the Christian calendar. The year Hung Mung first perceived the sacred cow and achieved illumination. Thus, Hassan Sabbah founded the Hashishim in 5090 AM. Weishaupt reformed the Illuminati in 5776 AM. And, to take a year in the middle of our novel, 1970 in the Christian calendar is to the Illuminati 5970 AM, just as it is in the calendar used by Royal Arch Masons. The reader can decide for himself whether this fact represents coincidence, complicity, or synchronicity. The Illuminati date for anything is always a higher number than that in any other calendar, since the Jews, and oddly the Scotch Rite Masons, date everything from 240 AM, Confucians from 312 AM, Christians from 4000 AM, Muslims from 4580, etc. Only Bishop Ussher, who dated everything from 4004 BC or -4 AM, produced an older starting point than the Illuminati. For instance, here are some random dates as they appear on the Illuminati system of reckoning. First Egyptian dynasty, 1100 AM. The Rig Veda written, 2790 AM. First Chow dynasty, 3000 AM. Founding of Rome, 3249 AM. Hassan Sabbah illuminated, 5090 AM. Indians discover Columbus, 5492 AM. Pegasus nominated for President of the US, 5968 AM. Returning to the yearly round, each of the 5 seasons is divided, of course, into 5 months, thus producing a year of 5 times 5 or 25 months. The first 3 months of every season, known as the tricycle, each have 15 days, which fits the law of 5 because 1 times 5 equals 5. The last 2 months of each season each have 14 days, which also fits the law of 5s because 1 plus 4 equals 5. Each season has 73 days because A, you have to get 73 when you divide 365 by 5. B, 7 plus 3 equals 10, the first multiple of 5 after 5 itself. And C, this corresponds, as Dr. Ignatius pointed out in the novel, to the 73 parts of the Illuminati pyramid, counting the eye as a part. The last day of each season is known as Eye Day and is celebrated in ways too foul to be mentioned in a book such as this, intended for family entertainment. The Mystic 23 appears in the calendar in the following ways. 1. The bicycle has 2 months and the tricycle has 3. 2. The bicycle has 28 days, 2 months of 14 days each, and when you subtract the all-important 5, this leaves again the Mystic 23. 3. When 5 is multiplied by its own first product, 10, the result is 50, and when this in turn is subtracted from the days in a season, 73, the significant 23 once again appears. 4. The tricycle has 45 days. Add 1 for leap year's day and you get 46, exactly 2 times 23. 5. 2 plus 3, of course, equals the all-important 5, the number on which the calendar is based, and, even more significant, the number of this proof. As Weishaupt said to Knigger after explaining all this, could Aquinas do better? Actually, the mystic meaning of these numbers is sexual. The male sex cycle is, as tantrists know, 23 days. Add the mystic 5 and you get 28 days, the female cycle. It's that simple. Or is it? The sanctification of the number 5 antedates Atlantis itself and goes back to the intelligent cephalopods who infested Antarctica about 150 million years before humankind appeared on Earth. See H.P. Lovecraft's work of fiction, At the Mountains of Madness, Arkham House, 1968, in which it is suggested that 5 was sacred to these creatures because they had 5 tentacles, or pseudopods. In this connection, the reader might find some food for thought in a conversation which took place between Hagbard Chalene and Joe Malick in the late autumn of 1980. Joe, at the time, had just received the Pulitzer Prize. He was also under investigation by a congressional committee in connection with the same achievement, publication of certain governmental secrets. 5 of the senators voted to cite me for contempt, for not revealing my source, Joe said. 3 voted against it, so I'll be cited, and the grand jury will draw up an indictment. There's that law of 5s again. Are you worried? Hagbard asked, relaxing in one of the heavy leather chairs that were part of Confrontation's new, more ornate offices. Hell no. I can always seek sanctuary in Panama or someplace if they convict me, and Peter can keep this operation going. You're not afraid to start a new life as an exile? Joe grinned. At my age, any new experience is an adventure. You're doing fine, Hagbard said. Here's your latest revelation from the A. He reached into his pocket and took out a photo of a female infant with 6 fingers on each hand. Got this from a doctor friend at Johns Hopkins. Joe looked at it and said, So? If we all look like her, there'd be a law of 6s. Joe stared at him. You mean after all the evidence I collected, the law of 5s is an Illuminati put-on? You've been letting me delude myself? Not at all. Hagbard was most earnest. The law of 5s is perfectly true. Everybody from the Jams to the Dalai Lama agrees on that. But you have to understand it more deeply now, Joe. Correctly formulated, the law is all phenomena are directly or indirectly related to the number 5, and this relationship can always be demonstrated given enough ingenuity on the part of the demonstrator. The evil grin flashed. That's the very model of what a true scientific law must always be. A statement about how the human mind relates to the cosmos. We can never make a statement about the cosmos itself, but only about how our senses or our instruments detect it, and about how our codes and languages symbolize it. That's the key to the Einstein-Heisenberg revolution in physics, and to the Buddha's revolution in psychology much earlier. But, Joe protested, everything fits the law. The harder I looked, the more things there were that fit. Exactly, said Hagbard. Think about that. If you need quick transportation to Panama, he added, heading for the door, call Golden Apple Transfers and leave a message. Appendix Gimmel. The Illuminati Theory of History. And to this day, the proverb is still repeated from the Danube to the Rhine. It is dangerous to talk too much about the Illuminati. Von Junst, unausprechlichen Kulten. Theoretically, an age of bureaucracy can last until a paper shortage develops, but in practice, it never lasts longer than 73 permutations. Weishaupt. Königin, Kirchen und Dummheit. In a well-known passage in the Necronomicon, Abdul al-Hatzrid writes, "They ruled once where man rules now. Where man rules now, they shall rule again. After summer is winter, and after winter, summer." Weishaupt, who possessed only the Olaus Wormius translation in the 1472 Lyon edition, with its numerous misprints and errors, found this text scrambled into, "They ruled once where man rules now, summer. Where man rules now, after summer is winter. They shall rule again, and after winter." Thoroughly confused, he wrote to his good friend, the Kabbalist Kolmar in Baghdad, for an explanation. Kolmar, meanwhile, dispatched a letter to him answering a previous question. When this epistle arrived, Weishaupt had been experimenting with a new strain of Alamout Black and was in no condition to realise it was a reply to an earlier query. He was thus ready to accept enlightenment in the words, "Concerning your rather thorny inquiry, I find that in most cases ergot is the best remedy. Failing this, I can only suggest the path of Don Juan." Weishaupt assumed that Kolmar meant the passage would become clear if he read it while under the influence of ergot. He promptly went down to his laboratory and tossed off a jigger. Then, for good measure, he chewed a few peyote buttons. He was under the misapprehension that the Don Juan referred to was the same Yaqui Indian magician of the 20th century, whose mind he had been tapping through the Morgenhäuter Gestern Welt. Peyote was that Don Juan's great teacher, and Weishaupt had imported some from Mexico at great trouble and expense. It should be explained at this point that the question which Kolmar was answering happened to be not philosophical but personal. Weishaupt had sought his advice on a problem much perplexing him that month, the fact that his sister-in-law was somewhat pregnant, and circumstantial evidence seemed to mark him as the father. He wasn't at all sure how to explain this to Eve. Kolmar had intended to convey that Adam should give his paramour the ergot, since it often functions as an abortifacient. The alternative referred to the path of an earlier Don Juan and meant splitting the scene entirely. However, the stoned Ingolstadt sage misunderstood totally, and so came to the Necronomicon full of hashish, peyote, and a substantial quantity of ergot, which had, under the influence of the other drugs and his own intestinal juices, mutated into ergotine, a close chemical cousin of LSD. The result was that the word seemed to leap out of the page at him, shouting with intense meaning. "They ruled once, where man rules now. Summer, where man rules now. After summer is winter, they shall rule again, and after winter." Abdul al-Hatzrid's concept of the great cycle, which derived actually from the Upanishads, took on kinky edges in Weishaupt's flipped-out cortex. 5 kinky edges, to be exact, since he was still obsessed with the profound new understanding of the law of 5s he had achieved the night he saw the Shoggoth turn into a rabbit. he quickly fetched Giambattista Vico's Scientia Nuovo from his shelf and began reading. He saw that he was right. Vico's theory of history, in which all societies pass through the same 4 stages, was an oversimplification. There were, when you look closely at the actual evidence behind Vico's rhetoric, 5 distinct stages. Each time the Italian listed only 4. Weishaupt looked very closely, and, like Joe Malick, the harder he looked, the more 5s he found. It was then that the man's truly unique mind made its great leap. He remembered that Joachim of Floris, a proto-primus Illuminatus of the 11th century, had divided history into 3 stages. The age of the Father, dominated by law, the age of the Son, dominated by love, and the age of the Holy Spirit, dominated by joy. Where most philosophers rush to publish their insights, Weishaupt saw the advantage of an alternative path. The law of 5s would be kept secret, so that only Illuminati primi would know about it and could predict events correctly. But the Joachimite theory would be revived and publicized to mislead others. He, Colmer, Meyer Amschel, Rothschild, de Sade, and Sir Francis Dashwood, the original 5, had some discussions about possibly pushing Vico instead of Joachim, but as Weishaupt argued, 4 is a little bit too close to 5. Even so, it was quite a spell of years before they found the ideal frontman to push the 3-step theory, G.W.F. Hegel. He's perfect, Weishaupt wrote in the De Mole cipher from Mount Vernon. Unlike Kant, who makes sense only in German, this man doesn't make sense in any language. The rest of the story, the exoteric story at least, is history. After Hegel was Marx, and after Marx, the Joachimite 3-step was permanently grafted onto revolutionary tactics. The esoteric story, of course, is different. For instance, in 1914, when the 5th and final stage of Western civilization was dawning, James Joyce published A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. The 5 chapters of that novel not only suggested 5 stages in the hero's growth, but by the alteration of styles from chapter to chapter, suggested analogies with other 5-stage processes. This was too much for the Illuminati primi of the time, who warned Joyce to be more careful in the future. A battle of wills ensued, and all through the writing of Ulysses, Joyce was still considering a novel built entirely around the law of 5s. When the Illuminati gave him what they call the Tiresias treatment, blindness, he finally compromised. Finnegan's Wake, when it appeared, broke with the Joachim Hegel-Marx 3-step, but did not include the Fundwissenschaft. Instead, the Viconian 4-stage theory was resurrected, a middle path that appealed to Joyce's sense of synchronicity, since he had once taught at a school on Vico Road in Dublin, and later also lived in a house on Via Giambattista Vico in Rome. Do you believe that? Now for a few words about the real truth, at least as the Illuminati understand real truth. Every society actually passes through the 5 stages of Verwirrung or chaos, Zweitracht or discord, Unordnung or confusion, Beamtenherrschaft or bureaucracy, and Grummit or aftermath. Sometimes, to make comparison with the exoteric Hegel-Marx system more pointed, the esoteric Illuminati system is defined as thesis, antithesis, synthesis, parenthesis, and paralysis. The public Hegel-Marx triad is also called the tricycle, and the arcane latter 2 stages are called the bicycle. One of the first secrets revealed to every Illuminatus minore is, after the tricycle, it comes always the bicycle. The Illuminati are rather prone toward literal translations from Weishaupt's German. The first stage, Verwirrung or chaos, is the point from which all societies begin, and to which they all return. It is, so to speak, the natural condition of humanity. an estimation which the reader can confirm by closely observing his neighbours, or, if he has the necessary objectivity, himself. It is, therefore, also the fundamental thesis. The Illuminati associate this with Eris, and also with other goddesses, from Isis to Ishtar, and from Kwannon to Kali, with the female principle yin in general. This correlates with the hexagram 2 in the I Ching, that is, K'un, which has the meanings of receptivity, nature in contrast to spirit, earth in contrast to sky, female in contrast to male. Thus, although this is the first stage chronologically, it has the mystical number 2, which is always associated with the female in magic, and it correlates with the second trump in tarot, the high priestess, who represents not only maternity and fertility, but gnosis. The sign of the horns represents Verwirrung, because the fingers make a V shape, and the planet, or the symbol of Venus, also designates this stage. On the zodiac, Aquarius. The second stage, Zweitracht, begins with the appearance of a ruling or governing class. This is the antithesis of chaos, of course, and leads directly into discord when the servile class discovers that its interests are not the same as the interests of the ruling class. This correlates with Osiris, Jehovah, and all masculine deities, with the symbol of the all-seeing eye, with hexagram 1 in the I Ching, Ch'ien, the creative, the heavenly, the strong, the powerful, with the male principle yang in general, with the number 3 symbolizing the all-male Christian Trinity, with the 12th trump of the tarot, the hanged man, symbolizing sacrifice, schism, and schizophrenia, and with the planet or symbol of Mars. Naturally, a Zweitracht period is always replete with internal contradictions, and somebody, like Karl Marx, always arises to point them out. On the zodiac, Pisces. The third stage, Unordnung or confusion, occurs when an attempt is made to restore balance or arrive at the Hegelian synthesis. This correlates with Loki, the devil, Mercury, god of thieves, Thoth in his role of trickster, coyote, and other spirits of illusion or deception, with hexagram 4 in the I Ching, Meng, youthful folly or standing on the brink of the abyss, with the number 11 signifying sin, penance, and revelation, with the 21st trump in the tarot, the fool who walks over the abyss, and with the planet or sign of Mercury. It represents that attempt to restore the state of nature by unnatural means, an annihilation of the biogram by the logogram. On the zodiac, Cancer. The fourth stage, Beamtenherrschaft, or bureaucracy, represents the parentheses that occur when the Hegelian synthesis does not succeed in reconciling the opposites. This correlates with void, absence of any divinity, with I Ching hexagram 47, K'un, oppression or exhaustion, superior man held in restraint by inferior men, with the number 8 indicating balance and the last judgment, with the 16th tarot trump, falling tower representing deteriorations and the Tower of Babel, and with the planetoid or sign of the moon. On the zodiac, Libra. The fifth stage, Grummit or aftermath, represents the transition back to chaos. Bureaucracy chokes in its own paperwork. Mind is at the end of its tether. In desperation, many begin to deny the logogram and follow the biogram, with varying degrees of success. This correlates with Hermaphrodite, with I Ching hexagram 59, Huan, dispersion, dissolution, foam on the water, with the number 5, union of male and female, with the 6th trump of the tarot, the lovers, indicating union, and with the sun or its symbol. On the zodiac, Virgo. Since the association of these references and their bearings on history may be a bit unclear to some readers, we will give further details on each stage. Verwirrung. In this chaotic period, the Hodge and the Podge are in dynamic balance. There is no stasis. The balance is always shifting and homeostatic, in the manner of the ideal self-organizing system of general systems theory or cybernetics. The Illuminati and all authoritarian types in general dislike such ages so much that they try to prevent any records of their existence from reaching the general public. Pre-Chao China was one such period, and its history, except for some fragments in Taoist lore, is largely lost. We do know, however, that the I Ching was reorganized when the Chao dynasty introduced patriarchal authoritarianism to China. It was then that the hexagram K'un, associated with this period, was moved from the first place to its present second place in the Qing. Every line in K'un is broken, yin, because this is a feminist and pre-patriarchal form of society, and because yin correlates with the agricultural rather than the urban. Always linked to darkness by mystics, this K'un style of sensibility is also linked by the Illuminati with dreck, dung, and everything they find messy and intolerable about ordinary human beings. The Irisians, of course, take the opposite position, connect this with Eris, the primordial goddess, and regard it as ideal. Verwirrung is numerologically linked with 2, not only because of K'un's shift from first to second place in the Qing, but because it is the balance of Hodge and Podge. Thus, even though it is the first stage chronologically, it is never linked with 1 in magic sense, because 1 signifies the erect penis, the male principle in isolation, and such authoritarian games, monotheism, monopoly, monogamy, and general monotony. This dynamic 2-ness of Verwirrung is also implicit in its tarot card, the second trump or high priestess, who sits between a black pillar and a white one, cf. the Hodge and Podge, and who represents mystery, magic, mischief, and Irisian values generally. She wears the balanced solar cross rather than the unbalanced Christian cross to emphasize the unity of opposites in such a historical period. Typical Aquarians who have manifested Verwirrung values are Aaron Burr, Christopher Marlowe, Hung Mung, Charles Darwin, Willard Gibbs, who incorporated chaos into mathematics, Mrs. Patrick Campbell, Elizabeth Blackwell, pioneer woman physician, Anna Pavlova, Mozart, Lewis Carroll, Robert Burns, James Joyce, Lord Byron, David Wark Griffith, and Gelett Burgess, author of the classic Irisian poem, I never saw a purple cow, I never hoped to see one, but I'll tell you this anyhow, I'd rather see than be one. The Verwirrung phase of European history is identified with the Danubian culture, so called because most of its relics have been found along the shores of the Danube. According to archaeologists, the Danubian culture was agricultural, pre-urban, worshipped a female rather than a male god, and never invented anything remotely like a state. The pre-Inca society of Peru, the Minoan civilization, the pre-Chao period of China already mentioned, and many American Indian tribes still surviving also represent a Verwirrung social framework. The synthesis of Hodge and Podge, and especially of biogram and logogram in such cultures, is indicated by the amazement of explorers from authoritarian societies when first encountering them. The usual words about the grace and spontaneity of the natives merely represent the lack of authoritarian conflict between biogram and logogram. These people sit, like the tarot high priestess, between opposite poles, without tilting one way or the other. But the fact that this is a dynamic and not a static balance means that eventually, after 73 permutations according to Weishaupt, the second stage must evolve. Zweitracht. In this discordant period, the hodge and the podge are in conflict because a ruling class emerges which attempts to control the others. This correlates with hexagram 1, Yen, the all-powerful in the I Ching. The 6 unbroken lines represent the severity and monotony of such a period, which is, above all, the age of the T-square, the building of fences, the division of lands by boundaries drawn on maps, and the imposition of one man's or one group's will upon all others. Typically, the Earth is regarded as both flat and finite by the Zweitracht mentality, and there is much concern with dividing it up into portions, among themselves, of course. The superstitious terror of American Indians when first confronting maps was merely the reaction of a Verwirrung mentality to a Zweitracht mentality. The Indians could not conceive of people treating Earth as a thing to be exploited rather than a mother to be respected. Zweitracht associates with 3 numerologically because 3 is the totally male number because all male trinities, Brahma, Vishnu, Siva, Father, Son, Spirit, etc., are invented in such ages, and because the discord always has a minimum of 3 vectors, not merely 2. That is, the division into a propertied ruling class and an unpropertied governed class immediately sets in motion further cupidity. The ruling class soon falls to fighting over the spoils. Contrary to Marx, most of the strife in Zweitracht ages is not the conflict between proprietors and proles, but between various proprietors over who gets the biggest share of the pie. The governing tarot card is Trump 12, the Hanged Man. The cross on which he hangs is blossoming, to show that it is still organic and alive, the biagram. He hangs upside down, to show the reversal of nature. He represents both the burden of omniscience in the owning governing class and the burden of nescience in the servile submissive class. The total crucifixion of desire by Realprinzip and Realpolitik. The astrological sign of this period is Pisces, the 2 fish swimming in opposite directions, indicating the conflict of logogram and biagram, body and spirit, astrologers say. Typical Pisceans who have shown the Zweitracht personality are E. H. Harriman, the railroad magnate who covered the United States with Chien-style unbroken straight lines, Cardinal John Henry Newman, Sir Robert Baden-Powell, founder of the Boy Scouts, an attempt to instill Piscean authoritarianism even in childhood, Admiral Chester Nimitz, John Foster Dulles, Anna Lee, founder of the world's most anti-sexual religion, the Shakers. Industrialists like Kruger and Pullman, financiers like Campbell and Braden, Grover Cleveland, John C. Calhoun, Neville Chamberlain, Andrew Jackson, whose expulsion of the Cherokee Nation from its traditional lands onto the Trail of Tears, where most of them perished, is the archetypal Zweitracht land grab. William Jennings Bryan, and Frank Stanton of CBS. Since all Illuminati with any academic leanings at all are encouraged to major in history, the tendency in most textbooks is not only to black out Verwirrung periods, but to glorify Zweitracht periods as ages of light and progress. Indeed, they make entertaining reading. They are ages of expansion, and there are always new people being discovered to be subjugated, civilized, and converted to taxpayers and rent payers. Almost any age described in glowing and admiring language in a history text will prove, on examination, to be a Zweitracht era. And foremost butchers and invaders are treated as the outstanding heroes of humanity. A sympathetic reading of the biographies of these empire builders almost always indicates that they were homo neophile individuals who turned their talents to destruction rather than creativity because of bitterness engendered by years of torment and baiting by homo neophobe types during their childhoods. the ever-present conflict in the Zweitrag period eventually leads to the third stage. Unordnung. Humanity has been transformed during a Zweitrag age by placing logogram in governing authority over biogram. Unordnung is an attempt to restore balance by revolutionizing the logogram. There is no thought about the biogram because contact with this somatic component of personality has been lost. This loss of contact has been variously described by pre-Chelenian observers. It is the veil of Maya in Buddhism, the censor band or repression in psychoanalysis, the character armoring and muscular armoring in Reichian psychology, etc. The I Ching hexagram for this stage is Meng, or youthful folly. The yang line at the top indicates the continued supremacy of logogram, even though some biogram elements, the yin lines, begin to reassert themselves. The traditional reading is mountain above water, that is, the rigid logogram still repressing the Aquarian element as it seeks to liberate itself. The usual Chinese interpretation of this hexagram is the young fool needs discipline, and the leaders of all rebellions at this stage always heartily agree with that and demand unquestioning obedience from their followers. This is a time of turmoils, troubles and tyrannies that appear and disappear rapidly. The mystical number is 11, which means a new start in Kabbalism and error and repentance in most other systems of numerology. Tarot Trump 21, the Fool, symbolizes this age as a dreamy-eyed youth unknowingly walking over an abyss. The Hitler Jugend and the disciples of various other Führers and Messiahs immediately come to mind. That this card is disputed by various tarot experts and is given a numerical value of 0 rather than 21 by the wisest indicates the confusion of all unordnung periods. The dog who barks to warn the young fool, like the yin lines in the hexagram, represents the desperate attempts of the biogram to break through the repression of censor band and make itself heard. Typical Cancerians who exemplified Unordnung are Julius Caesar, Mary Baker Eddy, whose philosophy was an explicit denial of the biogram, Albert Parsons, Emma Goldman, Benjamin Perret, Vladimir Mayakovsky, Henry David Thoreau, Durruti, P.J. Proudhon, Brooks Adams, General Kitchener, Luigi Pirandello, the literary master of ambiguity, Eric Ambler, the literary master of conspiracy, Calvin Coolidge, who issued the classically muddled Cancerian statement, "Be as revolutionary as science and as conservative as the multiplication table," Andrei Gromyko, Nelson Rockefeller, John Calvin, Estes Kefauver, and Rexford Tugwell. An Unordnung period has always been thought of, even before Hegel provided the words, as a synthesis between the thesis of Verwirrung and the antithesis Zweitracht, since it is a false synthesis on the logogrammic level only. It always gives birth to the fourth stage, the parenthesis. Beamten Herrschaft. This is the age of bureaucracy, and to live at this time is, as Proudhon said, to have every operation, every transaction, every movement noted, registered, counted, rated, stamped, measured, numbered, assessed, licensed, refused, authorized, endorsed, admonished, prevented, reformed, redressed, corrected. To be laid under contribution, drilled, fleeced, exploited, monopolized, extorted from, exhausted, hoaxed, and robbed. The governing I Ching hexagram is 47, Ka'un, oppression or exhaustion, the dried-up lake, with the usual reading of superior men oppressed by the inferior. This is the time when Homo neophobe types most rigorously repress Homo neophile types, and great heresy hunts and witch trials flourish. This correlates with the number 8, signifying the last judgment, because every citizen is to some extent a state functionary, and each is on trial before the jury of all. The traditional Chinese associations with this hexagram are sitting under a bare tree and wandering through an empty valley, signifying the ecological havoc wreaked by purely abstract minds working upon the organic web of nature. The 16th tarot trump, the Tower, describes this age. The tower is struck by lightning, and the inhabitants fall from the windows. Cf. the Tower of Babel legend and our recent power failures. The traditional interpretations of this card suggest pride, oppression, and bankruptcy. This correlates with Libra, the mentality which measures and balances all things on an artificial scale, Maya. Typical Libras who have manifested Beampton Hairshaft characteristics are Comte de Saint-Simon, Justice John Marshall, Hans Geiger, Henry Wallace, Dwight Eisenhower, John Kenneth Galbraith, Arthur Schlesinger Jr., John Dewey, and Dr. Joyce Brothers. In Beampton Hairshaft ages, there is ceaseless activity, all planned in advance, begun at the scheduled second, carefully supervised, scrupulously recorded, but inevitably finished late and poorly done. The burden of omniscience on the ruling class becomes virtually intolerable, and most flee into some form of schizophrenia or fantasy. Great towers, pyramids, moonshots and similar marvels are accomplished at enormous cost, while the underpinnings of social solidarity crumble entirely. While blunders multiply, no responsible individual can ever be found, because all decisions are made by committees. Anyone seeking redress of grievance wanders into endless corridors of paperwork, with no more tangible result than in the hunting of the snark. Illuminati historians, of course, describe these ages as glowingly as Vitrarch epochs, for, although control is in the hands of homo neophobe types, there is at least a kind of regularity, order, and geometrical precision about everything, and the messiness of the barbaric Verwirrung ages and revolutionary Unordnung ages is absent. Nevertheless, the burden of omniscience on the rulers steadily escalates, as we have indicated, and the burden of nescience on the servile class increasingly renders them unfit to serve. More and more are placed on the dole, shipped to mental hospitals, or recruited into whatever is the current analogue of the gladiatorial games. So the tower eventually falls. Grummet! The age of Grummet begins with an upsurge of magicians, hoaxers, yippies, kabooters, shamans, clowns, and other heuristic forces. The relevant I Ching hexagram is 59. Huan, dispersion and dissolution. The gentle wind above the deep water is the Chinese reading of the image, with associations of loss of ego, separation from the group, and going out in general. Yin lines dominate all but the top of the hexagram. The forces leading to a new Verwirrung stage are pushing upward toward release. This is also called paralysis by the Illuminati because, objectively, nothing much is happening. Subjectively, of course, the preparations for the new cycle are working unconsciously. The mystic number is 5, union of male 3 with female 2, and final resolution of conflict between Verwirrung and Zweitracht. The governing tarot trump is number 6, the Lovers, in which the woman looks upward at the angel, Eris, the biogram, and the man looks at the woman. The logogram Yang reaches synthesis with biogram Yin only through reconciliation with the female. Hence, the upsurge of feminism in such periods, together with a renewed emphasis on clans, tribes, and communes. Typical Virgos manifesting Grummet traits are Charlie Parker, Antonin Artaud, Louis Ling, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Grandma Moses, Lodovico Ariosto, Greta Garbo, Hedy Lamarr, and Goethe and Tolstoy, who manifested strong yin values while never quite getting reconciled with the women in their own lives. Tolstoy, however, as the classic dropout, is an archetypal Grummett persona, and almost completed the Sufi course of quit this world, quit the next world, quit quitting. After Grummett, of course, authority has collapsed entirely, and the biagram stands on equal footing with the logogram. Hodge and Podge being once again in dynamic balance, a new Verwirrung period begins, and the cycle repeats. Since Weishaupt dreamed this schema up while he was under the influence of several hallucinogenic drugs, one should regard it with some scepticism. It is certainly not true in every detail, and there is no theoretical or empirical demonstration that each of the 5 stages must always have 73 permutations. The fact that Grummett Virgo personalities, and all other of the 5 personality types, are born in all ages, even if they come to dominance in their appropriate epochs, leaves many mysteries still unsolved. In short, all that a sober scholar can say of the Illuminati theory of history is that it makes at least as much sense as the exoteric Marx Hegel, Spengler, Toynbee and Sorokin theories. The who regard all Illuminati theories as false projections onto the external world of inner spiritual processes, are particularly sceptical about this one, since it involves several false correlations between the I Ching and the Tarot, the Zodiac, etc. Finally, it should be noted that of all the people Hagbard employed as resonance for the vibes used against the Sauer family in Ingolstadt, only Lady Velcor, Danny Pricefixer, and George Dawn were not Virgos. Hagbard evidently believed that the Illuminati magical links work when Illuminati activities are occurring in a given area, and hence virtually all of his people at the festival were Virgos, and thereby linked with the Grummett, Huan 59, Trump 6 chain of astrological associations. On the other hand, the presence of 3 non-Virgos shows Hagbard's pragmatic approach, and his refusal to be ruled even by so exact a science as astrology. This sentence may manifest a lapse into mockery or mystification by otherwise sober authors. In this connection, when George Dawn and his mother went to Radio City Music Hall to see The Lotus Position, the last movie made by the American Medical Association before their tragic deaths, they happened to meet a tall Italian and a very beautiful black woman whom he introduced as his wife. Mrs. Dawn didn't catch the Italian's name, but it was obvious that George had a very great admiration for him. And on the bus back to Nutley, she decided to straighten the boy out. "A man who respects himself and his own race," she began, "would never think of marrying into the coloured." "Shut up, Ma," George said politely. "That's no way to talk to your mother," the fine lady said, going ahead blithely. "Now, your father had some radical ideas, and he tried to get the unions to accept the coloured, but he never thought of marrying into them, George. He had too much self-respect. Are you listening, George?" "How did you like the AMA?" he asked. "Such wonderful young boys, so clean-cut. And that darling sister of theirs. At least they didn't think there was anything attractive about long hair on men. Do you know what long hair makes men look like?" "Like girls, Ma, is that right?" "It makes them look worse than girls, George. It makes them look like they're not really men, if you know what I mean." "No, I don't know what you mean, Ma." George was profoundly bored. "Well, I mean a little bit on the lavender side," she tittered. "Oh," he said, "you mean cocksuckers. Some of my best friends are cocksuckers, Ma." At this simple piece of factual information, the remarkable lady turned red and then purple, and then twisted in her chair to look out the window in angry silence for the rest of the trip. The curious thing is that before George could get the courage to shut the old battle axe up that way, he first had to try to shoot a cop, and then try to shoot himself, and finally take hashish with Hagbard Jeline. And yet she was a Virgo, and he was a Capricorn. Appendix Daleth, Hassan Sabbah, and Alamout Black. When the Prophet died in 4632 AM, known as the year 52 to Muslims, 4392 to Jews and Scotch Rite Masons, 4320 to Confucians and 632 to Christians, the true faith was almost immediately shattered by conflict between the Shiite and Sunnite parties. More than a century of religious and civil warfare followed, and by 4760 AM the Shiites themselves had split and given birth to a subsect known as the Ismailis or Ishmaelians. It was out of this group that Hassan Sabbah formed the Order of the Assassins in 5090 AM. Ishmaelian religion had already at that date become a 9-level affair in the manner typical of mystical secret societies. Those of the lowest grade, for instance, were merely informed that Al-Quran contained an allegorical meaning in addition to its surface teachings, and that their salvation lay in following orders. As a neophyte progressed through the various grades, more and more of the allegories would be explained, and a doctrine would gradually emerge, which is, in essence, that taught by all the mystics of East and West Buddhists, Taoists, Vedantists, Rosicrucians, etc. The doctrine is, in important aspects, unspeakable, which is why the trainee required an imam, the Ishmaelian equivalent of a guru, to guide him in the non-verbal aspects. The 9th and highest grade, however, had no parallel except in very strict Theravada Buddhism. In this 9th grade, which Hassan attained shortly before founding the Hashishim, it was taught that even the personal mystical experience of the seeker, his own encounter with the Absolute, or the Void, or the Hodgepodge, or God, or Goddess, or whatever one chooses to call it, should be subject to the most merciless analysis and criticism, and that there is no guide superior to reason. The Ishmaelian adept, in short, was one who had achieved supreme mystical awareness but refused to make even that into an idol. He was a total atheist anarchist, subject to no authority but his own independent mind. Such men are dangerous, as Caesar observed, and certainly they are dangerous to the Caesars. The Ishmaelians were being persecuted throughout the Muslim world, and strong efforts were being made to exterminate them entirely when Hassan Sabbah became imam of the whole movement. It was Hassan's cynical judgment, and many illuminated beings such as the lamas of Tibet have agreed with him, that most people have no aspiration or capacity for much spiritual and intellectual independence. He thereupon reorganized the Ishmaelians in such a way as to allow and encourage those of small mind to remain in the lower grades. The tools of this enterprise were the famous Garden of Delights in his castle at Alamout, a good duplication of the paradise of Al-Quran, complete with the beautiful and willing houris the Prophet had promised to the faithful, and a certain magic chemical. Those of the lowest grade were brought to Alamout, given the miraculous concoction, and set loose for several hours in the Garden of Delights. They came out convinced that they had truly visited heaven, and that Hassan Sabbah was the most powerful holy man in the world. They were assured, furthermore, that if they obeyed every order, even at the cost of their own lives, they would return to that paradise after death. These men became the first sleeper agents in the history of international politics, where the three major contending religions of that time in the Near East, Christianity, Judaism, and Orthodox Islam, insisted that it was an unforgivable sin to deny one's faith, Hassan taught that Allah would forgive such little white lies when they served a worthy purpose. Thus his agents were able to pass themselves off as Christians, Jews, or Orthodox Muslims, and infiltrate any court, holy order, or army at will. Since the other religions had the above-mentioned prohibition against such deception, they were unable to infiltrate the Ishmaelians in turn. The use of these agents as assassins is discussed passim in the novel, and Weishaupt's opinion that Hassan had discovered the moral equivalent of war is an interesting commentary. Hassan never had to send an army into battle. An army sent against him was soon stopped by the sudden and unexpected deaths of their generals. One of Hassan's successors was Sinan, who moved the headquarters of the cult from Alamout to Messiac, and may, or may not, have written the letter about Richard the Lion-Hearted which George recalls in the third trip. Sinan, contemporaries claimed, performed miracles of healing, conversed with invisible beings, and was never seen to eat, drink, or perform the functions of urination and excretion. He was also credited with telepathy and with the ability to kill animals by looking at them. It was he, and not Hassan-i Sabbah, as many popular books state, who ordered 2 of the lower members of the order to commit suicide in order to impress a visiting ambassador with his power over his followers. The 2 obeyed, leaping from the castle wall into the abyss below. Sinan also made attempts to form an alliance with the Knights Templar, to drive both Orthodox Christians and Orthodox Muslims out of the arena, but this evidently fell through. The Hashishim were finally crushed, despite their powerful espionage and assassination network, when the whole Middle East was overrun by hordes of Mongols who came from so far away that they had not been infiltrated. It took several centuries for the Hashishim to make a comeback as the non-violent Ismailian movement of today, under the leadership of the Aga Khan. Finally, it was at Hassan-i Sabbah's death that he allegedly uttered the aphorism for which he is best known and which is quoted several times in the novel. Nothing is true, all is permissible. The Orthodox Muslim historian Juvaini, who may have invented this whole episode, adds that as soon as these blasphemous words passed his lips, Hassan's soul plunged to the depths of hell. Ever since Marco Polo recorded the story of the Garden of Delights, Western commentators have identified Hassan's magic chemical as pure hashish. Recent scholarship, however, has thrown this into doubt. It is clear that hashish and other marijuana preparations were well known in the Near East for thousands of years before Hassan ever lived. For instance, the plant has been found in grave mounds of late Neolithic man in the area, dated around 5000 BC, as Hagbard mentions in the novel. It is implausible, then, that the ingenious Sabbah would have tried to pass this drug off as something new and magical. Some have suggested that Hassan, who was known to have travelled much in his youth, might have brought opium back from the East and mixed it with hashish. The scholarly Dr. Joel Fort goes further and argues, in The Pleasure Seekers, that Hassan's supercharger was wine and opium, with no marijuana products at all. Dr. John Allegro, in The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, argues that both Hassan and the first Christians actually achieved the paradisical vision with the aid of Amanita muscaria, the fly agaric mushroom, which is poisonous in high doses but psychedelic, or at least deliriant, in small quantities. The present book's suggestion, Alamout Black, an almost pure hashish with a few pinches of belladonna and stramonium, is based on 1. The strong etymological evidence that the hashishim were somehow involved with hashish. 2. The unlikelihood that wine, opium, mushrooms, or any combination thereof could account for the etymological and historical association of Hassan with hashish. 3. The reasons previously given for doubting that hashish alone is the answer. 4. The capacity of stramonium and belladonna in small doses to create intensely brilliant visual imagery, beyond that of even the best grades of hashish. 5. The fact that these latter drugs were used in both the Eleusinian mysteries and in the European witch cult contemporary with Hassan. See R.E.L. Masters, Eros and Evil. Since it is not the intent of this book to confuse fact with fantasy, it should be pointed out that these arguments are strong but not compelling. Many other alternatives can be suggested, such as hashish belladonna mandragora, hashish stramonium opium, hashish opium belladonna, hashish opium bufotonin, etc., etc. Medieval magicians knew how to obtain bufotonin. They took it, as Shakespeare recorded, from skin of toad. All that can be said with certainty is that Hagbard Chalene insists the correct formula is hashish, belladonna, stramonium, in ratio 20:1:1. And we believe Hagbard most of the time. The exact link between the assassins and the European Illuminati remains unclear. We have seen, but no longer own, a John Birch Society publication arguing that the alliance between the Hashishim and the Knights Templar was consummated, and that European Masonry has been more or less under Hashishim influence ever since. More likely is the theory of Doral, Sit, that after the Hashishim regrouped as the non-violent Ishmaelian sect of today, the Roshinaya, illuminated ones, copied their old tactics and were in turn copied by the Alumbrados of Spain, and finally by the Bavarian Illuminati. The 9 stages of Hashishim training, the 13 stages in Weishaupt's Illuminati, the 32 degrees of Masonry, etc., are of course arbitrary. The Theravada Buddhists have a system of 40 meditations, each leading to a definite stage of growth. Some schools of Hinduism recognize only 2 stages: dhyana, conquest of the personal ego, and samadhi, unity with the whole. One can equally well posit 5 stages or 105. The essential that is common to all these systems is that the trainee, at some point or other, is nearly scared to death. An interesting account of a traditional system used by quite primitive Mexican Indians, yet basically similar to any and all of the above, is provided by anthropologist Carlos Castaneda, who underwent training with a Yaqui shaman and recounts some of the terrors vividly in The Teachings of Don Juan, A Separate Reality, Journey to Ixtlan, and Tales of Power. Don Juan used peyote, stramonium, and a magic mushroom, probably psilocybal mexicana, the drug Tim Leary used for his first trip. The difference between these systems is that some aim to liberate every candidate, and some, like Sabbah's and Weishaupt's, deliberately encourage the majority to remain in ignorance, whereby they may with profit be endlessly exploited by their superiors in the cult. The same general game of an illuminated minority misusing a superstitious majority was characteristic of Tibet until the Chinese communist invasion broke the power of the High Lamas. A sympathetic account of the Tibetan system, which goes far towards justifying it, can be found in Alexandra David Neal's The Hidden Teachings of Tibetan Buddhism. An unsympathetic account by a sceptical fellow mystic is available in The Confessions of Aleister Crowley. Another word about Alamout Black. It is not for the inexperienced psychedelic voyager. For instance, the first time Simon Moon tried it, in early 1968, he had occasion to use the men's room in the Biograph Theatre, where he had gone to see Yellow Submarine while under the influence. After his bowel movement, he reached for the toilet paper and saw, with consternation, that the first sheet hanging down off the roll was neatly stamped, "Official, Bavarian Illuminati, Ewiger Blumenkraft." On ordinary marijuana or hashish, such illusions occur, of course, but they are not true hallucinations. They go away if you look at them hard enough. No matter how hard Simon looked at the toilet paper, it still said, "Official, Bavarian Illuminati, Ewiger Blumenkraft." Simon went back to his seat in the theatre, badly shaken. 4 weeks afterward, he wondered if the Illuminati had some sinister reason for infiltrating the toilet paper industry, or if the whole experience were a genuine hallucination, and the first sign, as he put it, that this fucking dope is ruining my fucking head. He never solved this mystery, but eventually he stopped worrying about it. As for Hassan Sabbah X and the cult of the Black Mother, the authors have been able to learn precious little about them. Since they are clearly related somehow to the assassins and the cult of Kali, Mother of Destruction, one can consider them part of the Illuminati, or Podge side of the Sacred Cow. Since they seem to be businessmen rather than fanatics, and since Kali might be a version of Eris, one can consider them part of the Discordian or Hodge side. Mid such speculation and much mystery, they go their dark way, peddling horse and preaching some pretty funky doctrines about Whitey. Perhaps they intend to betray everybody and run off with the loot at an opportune moment. And then again, maybe they are the only really dedicated revolutionaries around. Nothing is too heavy to be knocked on its ass, and everything is cool, baby. It's the only summary of his personal philosophy that Hassan Sabbah X himself would give us. He's a studly dude, and we didn't press him. Appendix Tzaddai. 23 Skidoo. Linguists and etymologists have had much exercise for their not inconsiderable imaginations in attempting to account for this expression. Skidoo has been traced back to the older skedaddle, and thence to the Greek skadanoumi, to disperse hurriedly. The 23, naturally, has caused even more creative efforts by these gentry, since they are unaware of the secret teachings of magic. One theorist, noting that Sidney Carton, in Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, is the 23rd man guillotined in the final scene, a literary reference which Simon Moon, with his modernistic bias, overlooked, guessed that those playgoers who were eager to get out of the theatre before the crowd counted off the executions and skidooed towards the exits numbered 23. Another eminent scholar assumes that the expression has something to do with men hanging round the old Flatiron building on 23rd Street in New York City, a notoriously windy corner, to watch ladies' skirts raised by the breeze. When a cop came, they would skidoo. Others have mused inconclusively about the early telegraph operator's signal of 23, which means, roughly, stop transmitting, clear the line, or to be crude, shut up. But nobody claims to know how telegraphers picked 23 to have this meaning. The mystery's real origin is a closely guarded secret of the justified ancients of Mamu, which Simon had not attained the rank to learn. Dillinger, however, had attained this rank, and uses the formula quite correctly in the bank robbery scene in the third trip. It was printed by Prata Perdurabo, Alistair Crowley, in the Book of Lies, privately published 1915, republished by Samuel Weiser, Inc., New York 1970. The text of the spell makes up the totality of chapter 23 in that curious little book, and it reads, 23. Skidoo. What man is at ease in his inn? Get out. Wide is the world and cold. Get out. Thou hast become an initiate. Get out. But thou canst not get out by the way thou camest in. The way out is the way. Get out, for out is love and wisdom and power. Get out. If thou hast tea already, first get you tea, then get O, and so at last get out. It's not permissible to explain this fully, but it may be stated guardedly that T is the union of sex and death, Tau, the rosy crucifixion, Ut is Ugita in the Upanishads, and O is the positive void. Fission Chips, like our other characters, was given a chance to peruse this manuscript before publication and correct any factual errors that may have crept in. Of this appendix he said, "I think my leg is being pulled again, chaps." I suspect that Crowley wrote that in 1915 as a joke on his readers, and you blokes found it and inserted a reference to a magic formula used by Dillinger in your story, just so you could then compose this appendix and explain it. Such scepticism, straining at a gnat and swallowing a camel, may be compared to the stance of the Bible fundamentalist who avers that Yahweh made the universe in 6 days in 4004 BC, but included fossils and other false leads to make it appear much older. One could equally assert that the cosmos appeared out of void 1 second ago, including us and our false memories of a longer duration here. Appendix Vow, Flaxscript and Hempscript. Flaxscript was first introduced into Discordian groups by the mysterious Malaclips the Younger KSC in 1968. Hempscript followed the year after, issued by Dr. Mordecai Malignatus KNS. In the novel, taking one of our few liberties with historical truth, we move these coinages backward in time and attribute Hempscript to the justified ancients of Mamu. The idea behind Flaxscript, of course, is as old as history. There was private money long before there was government money. The first revolutionary or reformist use of this idea as a check against galloping usury and high interest rates was the foundation of banks of piety by the Dominican order of the Catholic Church in the late Middle Ages. See Tawney, Religion and the Rise of Capitalism. The Dominicans, having discovered that preaching against usury did not deter the usurer, founded their own banks and provided loans without interest. This ethical competition, as Josiah Warren later called it, drove the commercial banks out of the areas where the Dominicans practiced it. Similar private currency, loaned at a low rate of interest but not at no interest, was provided by Scots banks until the British government, acting on behalf of the monopoly of the Bank of England, stopped this exercise of free enterprise. See Llewellyn, Free Banking. The same idea was tried successfully in the American colonies before the Revolution, and again was suppressed by the British government, which some heretical historians regard as a more direct cause of the American Revolution than the taxes mentioned in most school books. See Ezra Pound, Impact, and additional sources cited therein. During the 19th century, many anarchists and individualists attempted to issue low-interest or no-interest private currencies. Mutual Banking by Colonel William Greene and True Civilization by Josiah Warren are records of two such attempts by their instigators. Lysander Spooner, an anarchist who was also a constitutional lawyer, argued at length that Congress had no authority to suppress such private currencies. See his Our Financiers, Their Ignorance, Usurpations and Frauds. A general overview of such efforts at free enterprise, soon crushed by the capitalist state, is given by James M. Martin in his Men Against the State, and by Rudolph Rocker in Pioneers of American Freedom, an ironic title since his pioneers all lost their major battles. Lawrence Labadie of Suffern, New York, has collected, but not yet published, records of 1,000 such experiments. One of the present authors, Robert Anton Wilson, unearthed in 1962 the tale of a no-interest currency privately issued in Yellow Springs, Ohio, during the 1930s Depression. This was an emergency measure by certain local businessmen who did not fully appreciate the principle involved, and was abandoned as soon as the tight money squeeze ended and Roosevelt began flooding us all with Federal Reserve notes. It is traditional among liberal historians to dismiss such endeavours as funny money schemes. They have never explained why government money is any less hilarious. That used in the US now, for instance, is actually worth 47% of its declared face value. All money is funny if you stop to think about it, but no private currency competing on a free market could ever be quite so comical and tragic as the notes now bearing the magic imprint of Uncle Sam, and backed only by his promise, or threat, that come hell or high water, by God he'll make it good by taxing our descendants under the infinite generation to pay the interest on it. The national debt, so-called, is of course nothing else but the debt we owe the bankers who loaned this money to Uncle after he kindly gave them the credit which enabled them to make this loan. Hempscript, or even Acidscript, or Peyote script, could never be quite so clownish as this system, which only the Illuminati, if they really exist, could have dreamed up. The system has but one advantage. It makes bankers richer every year. Nobody else, from the industrial capitalist or captain of industry to the coal miner, profits from it in any way, and all pay the taxes which become the interest payments which make the bankers richer. If the Illuminati did not exist, it would be necessary to invent them. Such a system can be explained in no other way, except by those cynics who hold that human stupidity is infinite. The idea behind Hempscript is more radical than the notion of private enterprise currency per se. Hempscript, as employed in the novel, depreciates. It is thus not merely a no-interest currency, but a negative interest currency. The lender literally pays the borrower to take it away for a while. It was invented by German business economist Silvio Gesell and is described in his Natural Economic Order and in Professor Irving Fisher's Stamp Script. Gresham's law, like most of the laws taught in state-supported public schools, is not quite true, at least not in the form in which it is usually taught. Bad money drives out good holds only in authoritarian societies, not in libertarian societies. Gresham was clear-minded enough to state explicitly that he was only describing authoritarian societies. His formulation of his own law begins with the words, "If the king issueth two monies," thereby implying that the state must exist if the law is to operate. In a libertarian society, good money will drive out the bad. This utopian proposition, which the sane reader will regard with acute scepticism, has been seen to be sound by a rigorously logical demonstration based on the axioms of economics in The Cause of Business Depressions by Hugo Bilgrim and Edward Levy. Economists can prove all sorts of things from axioms, and few of them turn out to be true. Yes, we saved for a footnote the information that at least 4 empirical demonstrations of the reverse of Gresham's law are on record. 3 of them, employing small volunteer communities in frontier USA, Keokuk 1830 to 1860, are recorded in Josiah Warren's True Civilization. The 4th, employing contemporary college students in a psychology laboratory, is the subject of a recent master's thesis by Associate Professor Don Werkheiser of Central State College, Wilberforce, Ohio.